In this video, I want to talk about documenting the status of ductwork inside of a dwelling. This is something that we've really struggled with in our program. Nobody really has this on their field collection forms right now. And I'd like each of you to take a look at your forms and figure out how to document the answers to these questions on your field collection forms. On your screen, this is a form that I've been using. If you'd like me to share this with you in some format, just reach out to me. I'm happy to share it. But basically, I want to talk about this section here where we're going to identify the duct status. Now, our goal here is to identify whether there's ductwork in the home, and then if there is, we need to figure out if it's leaky and if it needs to be insulated. So we're really trying to answer three questions. Is there ductwork? Is it leaky? Does it need to be insulated? And in order to do that, you really have to answer a couple of questions, and you've got to keep in mind that when you're answering those questions, that we're looking at different condition space versus the thermal boundary on answering those questions. So here's what mine looks like. The first one is, if I get to a house and there's no ductwork in the house at all, I need to be able to document that. This is one that often gets forgotten or does not get documented at all, and you really have to dig into the file if you're unfamiliar with it to figure out what's going on. So if you have this, just a checkbox or a way to circle something on your form, that would really help. You can quickly document what's going on and move on with the rest of your audit. So on this one, I just have a checkbox that says there's no ductwork in the dwelling, no testing is required. This shows that my job there is complete, and I move on to the next step of the process. The next check is that if all the ductwork is inside the condition space, you just need to document that, check a box, and you're done. That's it. You could, my form says it's complete, no testing required, and I move on to the next thing. But if there is ductwork inside the dwelling, but some of it is located outside of the condition space, that then triggers the requirement to test it for duct leakage. So in parentheses here, you can see that I have that there is some ductwork outside the condition space, and it's either in the attic, a crawl space. This could also be if you had a basement that was completely outside of your condition space and outside of your thermal boundary, or if you have an exposed floor or a cantilever. Now, those two things, they are bordering that condition space, but when you're talking about an exposed floor or a cantilever, often you'll have ductwork that's running through the floor. It may be wrapped in insulation, but in most cases we are using the floor above the cantilever as the pressure boundary or your air barrier. And so if you have ductwork down inside that cantilever and it's leaky, it's leaking to the outside. So anytime you have duct in an attic, crawl, exposed floor, or cantilever, you have to do duct leakage testing. So you need a way to identify that and document that, yes, this is the case. I do need to do this testing. So on my form, when I check that box, then it tells me I need to answer the next question, which we'll talk about in a second. And it also tells me I need to do some duct leakage testing. So the next thing there is, I've identified there is some outside the condition space. I do need to do some duct leakage testing. I also need to determine whether or not I need to insulate any of the ductwork. And so again, you just need a way to document this. Now, there is a way to document this in the audit. The problem is that it's in a spot that's easily forgotten. And so I want each of you to make sure that you're also documenting this on your field collection forms. This will help you to remember to document it in the audit. And this will also help us when a QCI is reviewing your audit, or if the state's reviewing your audit, it helps us to identify whether or not we've missed a step there. But this is what it looks like. When you're adding, when you're going to evaluate some duct that needs to be insulated on the audit, you do that on the heating tab, and you have to click on this uninsulated supply ducts. And if you'll look in the guidelines, you'll see that this is actually all ducts, whether it's a supply or a return. This is where you would put them into the audit to evaluate them. So don't be confused by the naming convention that was used here. But also notice when you're filling out this heating tab form, there's no required boxes on this uninsulated supply. So it's very, very easy to forget to click on this and forget to put in your ductwork that needs to be evaluated to be insulated. And then if you are evaluating it, this is what it looks like. And there's some information in the guidelines on how to fill that out. But in an effort to help us to make sure that we're remembering this and documenting it properly, you really need to answer one of these two questions on your field collection form, and that is all of the duct that is outside of the conditioned space, or actually, sorry, in this case, now we're looking at the duct that's outside of the thermal boundary, which is different from the conditioned space. And the best example of this is some ductwork in a crawl space. Say we have a crawl space and we've established the thermal boundary at the crawl space walls. So the thermal boundary goes all the way down to the dirt. And inside that crawl space, we do have some duct. Well, our guidelines say that you don't have to insulate the duct that's in that crawl space as long as it's inside that thermal boundary, but you do have to air seal it. And so that's why up above, we've identified we have to do some air seal testing on this duct, but we could have some ductwork that's in that crawl space, it's inside the thermal boundary, and so I would just check this box that says all the ducts are insulated, and it's basically saying everything that's outside of the thermal boundary is already insulated to a R8 or higher. But if you have ductwork that is outside the thermal boundary, say you've established the thermal boundary at the floor of a crawl space, now that ductwork is outside the thermal boundary and you do need to evaluate to insulate it. Or if you've got some ductwork up in an attic or in a cantilever or something, anyway, wherever it is outside of the thermal boundary, you would need to identify that and document that you actually had some and you do need to evaluate to insulate it. So on my form, I just have this checkbox that, I'm looking either all the duct is insulated or there is some uninsulated duct present. And when there is some uninsulated duct present, then I have this reminder here for me to describe that uninsulated duct. And in that way, I can remember to put it on my audit and evaluate it. So now, once I've checked those three questions here and the question about whether I have duct insulated or uninsulated, the rest of my form helps me to document whether I'm going to do a pressure pan test or a duct blaster test, and document what the duct looks like that needs to be insulated. So I hope that this helps you guys. I guess just quickly, I really, really like the forms that actually show when you're talking about duct leakage, we're either going to do a pressure pan test or a duct blaster test. And I really love the forms that actually document your pre-weatherization leakage test results like this on the audit. And then also your post-leakage, so that you have this side-by-side comparison. So your field crew and your QCI and everybody involved can see just how effective the duct sealing was. But from an auditor standpoint, really all I'm looking for is, did you actually figure out whether or not you needed to conduct this test, and did you document the results of the test? Now, remember from our guidelines, if any of these, if you're doing a pressure pan test, so I'm going to do a pressure pan test, and all my form does is it just grays out the section for the duct blaster tests if I'm going to do a pressure pan test. That way when I print this form, I can see that this information was not necessary, but this was. But I've got my form set up so that if any one of these readings is above a 2, because that's what our guidelines say, is if you have any supply or return registers that have a pressure pan test result above a 2, then the duct is considered leaky. So as you can see here, I have one duct that's above a 2, and this is the other thing that I would really love to see on your field collection forms is some results from your pressure pan test. You guys do a great job of actually documenting what the pressure pan leakage was, but the whole idea is to then say, well, okay, now do we need to do anything about it? Do I need a measure on the audit to actually tighten the ductwork or not? And in this case, my form automatically tells me the duct leakage, the duct is leaky, and I need to describe the corrections below. So, but that's what that looks like. If I, instead of picking a pressure pan, if I'm going to do a duct blaster, it grays out the pressure pan section, and it lets me fill in all of the stuff I need to fill in for my pressure pan test, and then same thing from the duct leakage test results. Then I actually have a conclusion to my test that says the duct was leaky, or the other conclusion I can show you on the duct pressure pan would be, I'm going to drop this, let's say it was a 1.3 in the kitchen, then my conclusion is that the duct is tight and no corrections are necessary. So that's really what needs to be happening. I know that most of that happens in an auditor's mind. It just does not get documented well when you're in your field collection forms. So take a look at your forms and see what you can do to improve them. I would really appreciate it. Thanks.